Do you want to say something, Phil? You got something to say? I was just going to say, I can see JP at last on the screen here. It's interesting to see how many people will stay. We had a wonderful, with JP, you can hear, they can't see you yet. We've had a great conference, and I know we'll say more thank yous later, but I personally want to say thank you to Phil and the team. It's been a... It's been a conference in the finest of the web science tradition, and I've heard the most amazing conversations between people who normally would never meet, completely different scientific cultures. And also what I like about this type of conference, and the people from Oxford who are here who might be involved in next year's, is the way that the social events, and we're all in the same place. And that's hard to achieve sometimes. We'll have to take over a hall in Oxford or something, a college rather. But it's the way that we can easily mix and get to know each other socially, as well as all be in a plenary session, which is something that we had from the very beginning of the Web Science Conferences, and I hope you've enjoyed the fact that you listen to everything. You listen to the sociologists, the computer scientists, the economists, and so on. Now, before we introduce JP Rangaswami, our keynote for this morning, I want to just hand the podium to Wolfgang Nadel, who runs L3S in Hanover, and who's volunteered to edit our new Journal of Web Science. Wolfgang, would you like to come and say a few words?
Thank you, Wendy. I'm happy to welcome you today with the announcement of a new journal. I think we have a really great conference. I'm happy to see you all here on the last day of the conference. And the conference is really important for community building. There's one drawback to a conference. The papers are sometimes too short for what you want to say, right? And in that context, sometimes you just want to bring in more details, discuss in more details, and anyway, in some of our communities, journals are more important than conferences. So we have been asked and talked about the journal since a few years already, right? And I'm happy to say that we are now able to announce a new journal, the Journal of Web Science, obviously. Name is very easy, right? You see the most important things here on the first slide, right? It's open access, so anybody can read it without going to his or her library and saying, okay, please shell out $10,000 to buy this journal. It's interdisciplinary, obviously, for our conference and for our community, and it will start in 2015. Just to, if I manage to go to the next slide. Okay, works. Good. Maybe you have seen the flyers outside. You can still take a copy. This is just a short copy of that, right? So that's the scope. It's not really surprising. It's similar to our conference with a really heavy focus on interdisciplinarity. So I really hope that we find, from all communities, we find contributions in this journal. There will be 4 issues a year, maybe about 8 papers each. And as I said, the first issue will be in 2015. And just as a last slide, these are the colleagues who are working together with me on this journal. But obviously, you have to work with us to make this journal a reality, to make this journal the place where you want to publish your results in more detail than you can do at a conference. And as I said, we are really looking forward a lot to receiving interesting submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. It's very exciting. I think I feel like web science is growing up, that we know enough about it now that we can have a journal, and the fact that the now publishers who publish the Foundations and Trends series have enabled us to make it totally open access, I think is very exciting. It's always a hard thing to do. Phil has asked me to remind you that this evening we have the final panel, which I think I'm on, so I have to be here. Jim's organising that. We have the prizes, and there was a... oh yes, and your lunch on your own today. You've had all the food from the conference. That was a wonderful dinner last night. Really fun, and perfect place to have it as well. And I hope you all know that the food is in support of charity. All that last night was the people who organise it do it in support of charity. And so the panel and the prizes at what time? 4 o'clock tonight? Is it, Jim? What time does the panel start for? 3:30? Anyway, it's in your programme. Right. Now, at the other end of the line, shall we put JP up now? It's my great pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker. We've had myself excluded, we've had a string of wonderful keynote speakers. And JP, unfortunately, he was going to be here. He had his flights booked. But on doctor's orders, he's in the UK because of a problem with walking that he has, a bad foot. And, but you're getting better, aren't you, JP? We can see you now.
Good. Good morning, everybody.
Actually, I can see you on the screen now. And, people are waving at you. I can see there's people that know you that are waving at you.
Wave back.
It looks like people know JP. Of course, he is formerly the chief scientist at Salesforce. He travels the world talking about the things that we care about. I mean, he's an economics and statistics graduate from the University of Calcutta. And has worked for many companies and is so well known for his thoughts in our world. If you and he really cares passionately about this, and I would really recommend, if you've never met JP and you haven't heard about it before, then you really should follow his blog, which is wonderfully called Confused of Calcutta. And when you look at the blog, there's what I call JP's creed, which starts off with, I believe that it's only a matter of time before enterprise software consists of only 4 types of application: publishing, search, fulfillment, and conversation. I believe that weaknesses and corruptions in our own thinking about digital rights and intellectual property rights will have the effect of slowing down or sometimes even blocking this from happening. And so I won't read it all to you. You can see it on his blog site, and it goes on in that vein. And he's a really deep thinker about this world. He's been a fantastic supporter of many things. He's chair of Ribbit. You're the chair?
No longer. I've resigned from it now.
But you have been. And also he is on the board of the Web Science Trust and helps steer us in terms of how we steer the world doing web science research and teaching about in this area. He's also a great cricket fan, and there's nothing better than spending a day. This is a UK thing, I'm sorry. Baseball just isn't the same thing. There's nothing better than spending a day at cricket with JP, and you get this wonderful mix of cricket and JP philosophy. So you're going to hear the JP philosophy now. There's no cricket involved unless he comes up with a joke about it. JP, the floor is yours for as long as you want it.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thanks everyone who waved. It's a real honor and a privilege to be able to do this. I'm also so happy we can manage to make it happen without my having to fly. Long haul has not been something that I've been advised to do until my joint works properly. They're claiming it has something to do with age. I fully refute that. I haven't seen the evidence. Anyway, I wanted to just share my thoughts about why I was so excited when I first heard about web science by just sharing my first reaction to what Wolfgang just said, because it was the same kind of reaction I had when Wendy and Nigel were telling me what web science was going to be trying to do. Because if you feel there is a need for something, and then after that need being latent for a while, you see it being fulfilled. So I got a real lift in my spirit when I heard the announcement of their journal. So well done, everyone involved in that. I'm excited about it and looking forward to hearing more. But let me sort of roll back to when I was a teenager. Why do I have this passion that Wendy was speaking about? Why do I think that web science is really important for this world? And it all began when I must have been 12, 13, and part of the headlines was being taken up. We'd exited worries about an ice age and the beginnings of conversations of what we would call climate change now were coming through into popular speak. But the term that people were using was about damage and holes to the ozone layer. And fingers were being pointed at all manner of chlorofluorocarbons and an expectation that legislation would be necessary to prevent this damage continuing, because the global warming terms and the climate change terms all succeeded what appeared to begin, at least to the teenager in me then, as a debate about this ozone layer. And I was curious, intrigued, tried to track it. And a few weeks after I read that there'd been legislation in many parts of the developed world to say that CFC producing devices, products, services would be sort of eased out. And we were hearing about, aerosols that were more natural and how they worked, or refrigeration equipment that no longer relied on CFCs. And at the same time as hearing that, I read about a new refrigeration plant coming up in India using that was coming from the West, so that we could start delivering those refrigerators. The white goods revolution was beginning to catch some traction in India. And I was then told that those refrigerators were actually going to work with CFCs. And now the young student in me was completely bemused, because anything I could understand of what this ozone layer was had been thrown out of the window. Was it sort of geostationary, and all the damage was sort of just, outside the developed world? I started getting concerned. I started getting even worried that it didn't make sense. But I then tried to track the issue, because I realized that this was more of, a politics issue. People had sort of regional and political and social boundaries that allowed such decisions to get made, where one group of countries could decide to block the use of technology involving CFCs while selling that technology for use elsewhere. And nobody batted an eyelid for that kind of behavior. And that's what I was thinking about, and beginning to understand something about the nature of global problems and the fact that multicultural, multidisciplinary ways of engaging had to happen. And a little while later, I heard my grandfather say something which, he was a professor of chemistry at Madras Christian College, and he said something that had the effect of depressing me very quickly, which, he did a lot of things that sometimes did that, but he was also responsible for lighting some of my curiosity. So, I love him lots. He managed to last into his 90s. But the thing he said was that my generation, and I'm going to be 57 this year, may be the generation of peak longevity. And I looked to him, and all the evidence, everything I'd ever learned suggested that sentient man seemed to be evolving, and even at sort of successive generations on Earth, I could see sort of change taking place in our capabilities and our strengths and our abilities in so many ways that the idea of peak longevity made no sense to me. And these two themes of saying we didn't appear to know how to act globally for global problems, and that at least one of those problems was going to be about our own lifespans, and that it would start degrading or could start degrading in terms of the generations to come, just formed a sort of a backdrop for what I used to think about. And then the next sort of 40 years, all I've been watching is some sort of idea that whether we look at water, whether we look at climate change, whether we look at healthcare issues, nutrition, like the debates about, fats and sugars, whether we look at GM crops, whether we look at fracking or sinkholes even, the growth and development of cities and towns and how that's taking place, the advent of technology and its adoption in society, it didn't matter. Every one of these cases seemed to have debate that didn't suggest itself to be scientific. A lot of position taking, evidence that wasn't necessarily open or transparent or shareable. The nature of the debate seemed to be polarization. Sometimes I felt I was in Gulliver's Travel, and all I was watching was, the citizens of Blefuscu sitting down and arguing about being the big Indians or the little Indians, and that polarization had become a part of every debate, and highly emotional, highly charged, but fundamentally, debate was turning emotional rather than evidence-based. And seeing those problems continue and understanding that it was this sort of climate meets health meets water meets energy are the kind of issues that could affect the lifespans of generations to come. It became a source of immense frustration to me. So when the web arrived, this idea that a collaborative fabric could emerge with low barriers to entry that allowed people to connect and share, because we had telecom systems that were allowing the connecting, but the nature of sharing, the ability to start becoming sort of asynchronous in how we shared, inspected others, reviewed, commented, interacted, that whole process took a complete change with the advent of the web. And the best way I could see of one way of doing things and the web way of doing things and the differences, because again, you should use evidence rather than just, a jingoistic belief in the web to say, is this working? And all I could see was it took about 20 years to get to the point of protocols and agreements of around CFCs, and that was around 1989. And it took about 20 years for the evolution of what became the web placed on, top of the connectivity capabilities and framework and infrastructure. So by 1989, the two initiatives in a way could be seen as getting to zero with a groundswell of momentum behind it that may have taken a few decades. And then I look at what happened in the 25 years since. And then suddenly I see something quite different, that the web has sort of blossomed into one of the greatest acts of capital creation known to mankind, and capital of every kind, human, social, financial, you name it. The barriers to entries have remained sustainably low, that while challenges come and go and they ebb and flow, the nature of the web has somehow managed to sort of root around obstacles as it is wont to do. And we still have CFCs in use in many places. So I see two different 25-year spans, two different 25-year trajectories. And when Wendy and Nigel and Tim spoke about web science, the excitement to me was that people were actually going to get, scientific about looking at the web in order to understand how the web affected life and how we can improve things as a result. but doing this, with a basis of hard evidence, learning to, study data about the data, understand what the web is, was, will be in ways that we haven't been able to apply that. And not to do that, when I started university, I couldn't have taken a degree in computer science. There wasn't one. There wasn't one available in India for sure. I don't know whether there was one available anywhere in the world. People did a numerate degree, often an engineering degree, and then segued their way into computing. So even the concept of computer science had an origin and a time. And so understanding that, watching the web, we had learned just how incredibly complex the web environment is in terms of needing to understand at one end, anthropological aspects, and at another extreme, legal aspects, and understanding this multi-jurisdictionally, learning to watch all this while even understanding the ebbs and flows of commerce. It's, the more I heard about it, the more I realized that, I was able to participate in, however small a level, something that could turn back this statement my grandfather made about peak longevity. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized every single problem that I could see that we faced were problems that could be sort of multiplied, augmented, amplified by poor data, by lack of shareability across boundaries and cultures and disciplines and skill sets, that we would have debates that were just almost endless loops because there wasn't an objective and sound basis for them, and that the web was beginning to create an environment where people were able to challenge it. And that started exciting me, and I remain excited now. Now, it's not new to say that, new paradigms have new problems and there are new solutions, but when I look at what's happening today, when we live in such a connected world that, I joke with people that my kitten uses my iPad, but part of it is not a joke, that, we live in a day and age that the keyboard, which has been the technology that someone has had to conquer in order to engage with information, has fallen by the wayside, and we now use our senses to engage. Nobody in this room, nobody I speak to, actually questions the possibility that everyone and everything will be connected in less than a decade. There probably already are more mobile phones than there are people. And this, talking to a person where when I left India in 1980, the waiting list for a landline was over 3 years. And the nature of calls I made had to be person to person, named individuals. I mean, there is so much change taking place that studying that change in a consistent way and understanding that the web is, a way of a lens to look into that change, a way of being able to reflect that change, a way of even being able to study that change, that it's fractal in nature, because there is nothing better than the web to study the web in all its fineness, in every way that it gets used. So that sort of drove me to want to get more engaged. And this idea of data on the web, about the web, inspectable, shareable, delivered, that's why the open access element of the announcement of the journal was important, that everything that is done about the web is done keeping the philosophy of the web there, starts building a groundswell, starts building momentum that allows the optimist in me to see that the possibility now really exists, that, as a collective, as humanity, we learn to tackle these problems. And, and we're doing it at a time when there appears to be a willingness and an ability to put almost any label you like in front of the word data, right? I'm waiting to hear about yellow data and pink data, because after a while, they're going to run out of adjectives that don't mention color, and then someone else will probably say that's politically incorrect, and They'll start numbering sequences for data. I don't know what, but we live at an age and a time when people talk a lot about data, and there are probably more data science specialists than there are people in China by now. And and we've sort of seen that it's not the first time such things happen, and won't be the last time. And I'm not making myself to be any sort of specialist on it. It's just the tools that are needed to be able to understand how to make sense out of data are itself needing to change, because in the past it would appear to me that we knew something about aggregating data, from individual onwards, but we've had concepts of big data for decades in, exploration at oil level, oceans, seismology, and in the geophysical world, we've had a lot of examples of places where people were used to very large quanta of data and learned the tools and techniques to use them. But they didn't have the classic 4V or 5V problem to do with big data today. One of the changes that manifests itself, which is again characteristic of the web, is that everyone becomes a publisher and a subscriber. That interactivity, that ability for every single person connected to the web to be a collector of, a human sensor, a human actuator, able to participate in global abilities to collect the information necessary for us to make sense of things. And that means that there are many, many sort of new learnings that we have to take place about how the idea of collective intelligence works. And, many of us know many colleagues who've been working in that, but it needs to be done in such a way that it itself, that the science of studying the web in that form, to learn about the web and to help advise people about the web, is itself democratized in nature. And that democratization sort of begins with the very notion of web science, the ability to have the disciplines in a cross-disciplinary way itself, the ability to keep the barriers to entry low, the ability to follow basic scientific discipline and being able to say, it must be reproducible, it must be inspectable, it's transparent. And this ability to share is going to need us to learn many, many things about data. We've already had cases where some, apparently scientific publications of results have proven over time not to be as scientifically arrived at as would be the case. And we have cynicism because of the connect between, business and money and society and government and politics. And it becomes the role of the scientist to be able to provide objective, dispassionate results so that these decisions can be evidence-based. But these decisions are themselves having to take place in environments where the deciding organism doesn't exist. It is no surprise to me that we get into quandaries and challenges when it comes to what governance, initially of the internet and then on to the web. Why governance becomes an issue is that today, even in trying to understand how we would make decisions about global issues, if you look at the institutions that followed some partly the First World War and then much more at the end of the Second World War, the global institutions that we built to try to deal with global challenges are actually finding it relatively difficult to gain traction about being able to decide on something apolitically. And I think that we may underestimate the power of web science to be able to create that objective layer, not, by no means making either the trust or the network that has been established, the institute themselves, the institutions offering the degrees of study, the observatory. It's not even any of those. It's it's going beyond that to saying the very concept of web science exists to help us create a way of coming to debate and decision about issues that span borders. And that to make that happen, we have to follow the learnings and the disciplines that the web itself had and will continue to have. And that organic nature is itself part of what makes this drivable. And the moral and philosophical issues that are coming through about how a connected world behaves itself needs web science to be able to get to the answers of. And I'm using web science as constantly reestablishing that it's beyond just collaboration between closed pairs. The openness and transparency of the research itself starts driving some of these aspects. And, when you build filtering, when everyone's connected, we have information overload issues or logjam, but as Clay Shirky said, there is no such thing as information overload, there is only filter failure. So designing for the right filters in a world where we've gone multi-device, where information passes near real time, we need to be able to understand better about the filtering, and the understanding will have to transcend issues like saying publisher-side filters run the risk of there being censorship, because if you provide controls at the publisher end, it is more likely to be able to create the ability to censor. And that subscriber-side filtering is what can avoid filter bubbles, as people like Eli Parish spoke about. But rather than make these as statements and assertions and pop philosophy or whatever else, again, we have the ability as a collective to be able to test these things and saying, in something as simple as information overload, what are we learning? What are the behaviors? How can we get the filtering right? It goes beyond that in saying, there are discussions that take place now. I haven't delved into the detail, but I can understand the nature of the questions and saying, when we have an internet of everything, when we have a web that is extended into wearables, when we have devices that are getting smarter and smarter, then we're going to be getting closer to encoding many of our values, our ethics, encoding philosophy almost, and understanding how that is changing our lives, when those changes are meaningful, when those changes are not. Whenever I walk through an exhibition of the projects in web science, I keep getting amazed at the sheer breadth and width of what people are able to study, what they choose to study, and how that which they study gets shared. So, it's partly how I started seeing debate on whether driverless cars would have algorithms that would have unintended consequences of things like, would it become safer not to wear a seatbelt? Right? Because of someone having to encode that. But again, it's one of these things where the nature of debate lends itself to a cross-disciplinary, multicultural, global, open environment, so that the debate can be had on real evidence, that the capacity to collect that evidence is done using scientific methods. The basis by which that evidence is exposed is done using scientific methods, and we get to the possibility of getting out of this closed loop of politics and emotion. Right? We have the world of drones coming through, and again, there are moral and philosophical issues. The whole issue of the digital divide. Every time I hear about it, there's an optimistic part of me that says that regions and countries and entire cultures that show the threat of being left behind suddenly land up leapfrogging us. So there's a part of me that still believes that, perhaps the most powerful environment where we will see web science evolve is Africa. Even though people will keep telling me it's the least connected part of the world. The possibilities exist, and the leapfrogging, the inventiveness, the creativity that is taking place as people get connected there start manifesting behaviors that will become valuable in almost an innovation sort of export out to those countries. And that excites me. Bringing all these things together, this need for an environment where we don't start creating kite mark certifications. Nothing I have heard, seen, felt about the trust, the centers where the doctorates are being studied, the actual institutes, the observatory. None of this is an attempt at a kite marking or a certification as much as an empowerment. And, I'm sure that we will continue to see activities in web science that don't necessarily use the term. But if we do this right, they will all be contributory, right? The you say tomato, I say tomato problems can be solved if the right kind of culture of sharing is there. I remain convinced that the problems that I learned about as a child and the behaviors I've seen manifested in the last 40 years since are problems that require web science at the heart of it to solve. I remain convinced that everything I've seen about where web science is going shows a trajectory that excites me because I now begin to see the light at the end of that tunnel. The people in this room are part of what give me those grounds for optimism. I continue to be excited. I think the journal's a fantastic idea. Learning about the networking that took place in the corridors or the restaurants yesterday makes me feel even more. I wish I could have been there, but it's been a privilege to be able to talk to you this long. I said all that I want to say right now, and I would love to open up for questions and debate.
Cool. I'll handle the questions this end, JP, because it's probably hard for you to see people. Can you come up to the mic if you'd like to ask JP a question?
I don't think we'll want to use the mic. I think
we'll
muddy it. JP, can you hear me okay where I'm standing?
I can hear you fine where you're standing.
Okay.
So if folks want to stand here, JP will be able to see you. I suggest facing the screen, and any of you teach and/or present things yourselves regularly. I assume you have teacher voice. If you use it, I think it will be cool.
Well, but firstly, I got a question for you guys. Not being there means I can't get a sense of feedback and not being able to see your eyes, etc. So even as a show of hands, was I on the money? Is this what you were expecting to hear? I just want to get a sense. Did it make sense to you? Because
Yay!
Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry. Yo.
Oh, yeah.
This is the conference where we discovered yo.
Okay, I have been notified. or maybe if we let it happen long enough, someone will start using the noun verb and I will be notificated.
We'll just have a collective yo to JP. Yo. Okay? That was great, JP. Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have said that because I could have given you that feedback. Everyone here, we've been tweeting away. Now, there must be questions. JP's, well, come on, people. This is early morning here, I know.
And unlike you, I haven't had breakfast.
Jim's coming. Jim's going to start. Jim, yeah?
Professor Hendler.
Yeah, Hendler. He's going to kick things off.
Morning, JP. How are you?
I'm well, Jim. Missing the ability to travel, but...
the drinking wasn't nearly as much fun without you last night. although some of these people were karaokeing until 3 a.m.
It only depended on the genre of the music. If they were karaokeing to the late 60s or the early 70s, I would have been quite happy.
So JP, one of the things we'll be doing this afternoon is we have a panel that's sort of on the grand challenges for web science. And there's really sort of two ways we're looking at that. One is, what are the big problems to be solved? But the other one is really, what are the challenges to bringing together this community and making it able to do the kinds of things you've been talking about? I wonder if you have some thoughts on that latter part, both as the community and the leaders of the community could be doing to really help make more of the things in the vision you just outlined happen?
I guess, I too have been trying to think about it for a while, because it's very easy and facile to say, education, education, education. But I think, where I was coming from, being able to expose web science projects, not just as the results of the projects themselves, but almost at a meta layer to say, look at what we learned about standardization of data from heterogeneous sources here. Look what we learned about visualization that would work on a cross-cultural basis here. Look at how this project helped, had to work with constraints on data collection, which were overcome in the following tools. That the very notion of every sort of web science project, every sort of doctoral thesis, every route of study would itself create reusable byproducts that would allow people to solve what they saw as local problems in a more consistent way, that we would have the ability to rank these tools as they emerge, to be able to expose them, simplify the cost of discovery, learn to have them sort of peer-reviewed, rated, that rather than make it theoretical, the ability to put this layer of learning around the projects may itself help us achieve that aim. Am I making sense, Jim?
Yes, great, thanks.
I've got a question about people in the audience.
Okay.
Yes, okay. I'm trying to encourage them. I'm going to ask you something, JP, but please say, JP won't be able to necessarily see who you are and won't know you, Seth, so I doubt.
Hi JP, thanks for your talk. My name's Seth, I'm new to web science. One of the things that struck me was a comment you made about the web being, a vehicle for human capital, financial capital, several other kinds of capital. How do you see the tension between financial capital and human capital or social capital? So the web in its history has grown to become hugely commercialized very, very rapidly. And that seems to be something, a tension that underlies a lot of web science. How do you see, how can web science make progress on resolving that or overcoming that tension?
I think that ever since the internet was visible to me, and it took till the mid-80s before I could really claim that to be true. Ever since the web was visible to me, and it was the mid-90s before I could claim that to be true. I have been told of the death of first the internet and then the web. And people have been willing and able to use, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 sort of framings, almost as quickly as we've had data scientists grow up. And I have remained calm through that process, largely because I actually believed in this rooting around obstacles much more. The phrase that comes to mind is, every artificial scarcity gets met by an equal and opposite artificial abundance until the scarcity disappears. Okay, so repeatedly, whether you look at DRM, whether you look at control on allocation of ports, whether you look at encryption methods, the tendency has been that if it is something that is not socially valuable, somebody finds a way to hack it. Somebody finds a way to crack through it. And then those solutions, it's like, which scientist would want really to be associated with putting a region coding on a DVD? Have you found the customer for whom value was created by doing that? one day I'm buying CDs and I can play them anywhere. The next day I buy a game for my 7-year-old son at the time, and I buy it while I'm in New York, and I can't play it when I bring it home to him, and he's been waiting for it because there's region coding. But then before I know it, people build things that are chipped to get over those region codes. So I sense that the idea of the economics of abundance is still in its infant stages within commerce. But there are smart people who have latched on to that. The idea of how open source is now such an integral part of so much of what we do, how the open data movement is getting immense traction, how people ask questions about it, how I see that now starting to embed itself into commerce in the same way as you can't find an institution not using open source tools. I expect soon we won't find an institution not using open data. And that's like with open source, it's not just a consumption model for value, it becomes a participatory model. So my sense is that commerce left to itself will atrophy into what you have seen before, but this tendency for a connected humanity to root around obstacles with the power of this digital web that we've created seems to overcome those at a good enough rate for me to remain optimistic.
Great. Do you think that attitude scales to governance problems like net neutrality, that sort of laissez-faire, everything will come good, it's just the nature of the web to resist those sorts of challenge? Or do you think that you need to take a more active role in, or web science maybe needs to take a more active role?
I don't live in the US, so even though I've tried to keep myself au fait with the issues, from my time at BT, it is hard for me to see neutrality issues sustainable when there is true open competition. Right? If you have a really competitive landscape and one provider starts blocking, traffic shaping, enhancing in comparison with the others, you've just opened the door for 9 other providers to take the opposite view and to market into the community. So I think all I have to believe in is that competitive intensity will allow that. It's not quite laissez-faire, because laissez-faire itself will need a level of competitive openness to happen. But what excites me there is the possibility, the likelihood that it's the Africas, the Indias, and the Chinas that will show the way, because going back to a trivial time, I remember when in the late 1990s when a small number of people, but apparently a very large number of people were working on this Y2K so-called problem, where a lot of the problem was not knowing what they had and not having an inventory, not having a catalog and understanding of their estate. But one of the things I found when I visited Central and Eastern Europe then was that they had somehow missed the Y2K problem because they arrived at being able to digitize themselves that much later in the cycle. And in a similar way, if you don't have legacy structures already there in telecoms, in governance of telecoms, in governance of the internet, in governance of the web, from a local jurisdiction, there may be new forms of governance that emerge as a result, where the role of web science is to make those governance models studied, learned, and then transmitted, so that more active debate can be had in the legacy countries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come up to the front? Another question. It's amazing here, JP, the picture. I've just tweeted one of people coming up to speak. Your face, you're huge on this screen up here, and people are coming up to speak to you, and it's like coming up to the oracle.
Wendy, coming from Salesforce, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, another question. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Padmini Srinivasan from University of Iowa.
You might need to speak up a little.
I'm Padmini Srinivasan from University of Iowa, and thank you for this very interesting presentation. I'd just like to request you to speak a little bit on the intersection of web science on the one hand and the congruence of creativity, empowerment, and especially from varied cultures. I've seen some writings in your blogs, and I think I'd like to also say that in some sense web science can be a little, forgive me, dodgy, because it's still got strong academic footprints. And I would like to see how could we promote creativity, especially in regions of the world that have not yet been sufficiently represented, and in terms of promoting creativity from those segments. Perhaps you could speak to that.
Okay, and I even promised not to speak in Tamil.
Oh, okay. All right.
What?
Oh, sounds good. Either way.
Yeah. Just an aside to the others, I realized from the surname there was a likelihood that the questioner spoke my mother tongue. I think that, academia may be getting more of a tarnishing than I would necessarily give it. Let me answer more specifically on the contention or a potential contention between web science and creativity. Firstly, I don't see any. The places where I see contention for the creativity are actually much more to do with issues like intellectual property, issues as covered within the net neutrality type questions, places where we create new barriers that prevent some freedom of movement within that environment. Wherever there is creation, there must be some ability for the creator to to collect rents. That rent collection has to be related to the nature of the investment made and the value of the creation itself. And the world of commerce has its way of both funding as well as challenging the world of creation in that environment. And that's something that has been going on since the possibility of Person A helping patronize, support, in any way fund, either through debt or equity or grant, or even just goodwill or grace. That contention has taken time to evolve, but much of our learning over the last, 400 or 500 years has been built much more on the scarcity model. And I think that the role of web science is going to come in encouraging people to study on abundance models in that intersection, and then making the learnings of those abundant models, both in terms of tools as well as in terms of outcomes, available to others, so that the essence of the DNA of that thinking about abundance, which militates against any possibility of conflict between the funding and the creation sources, if we really look at how, gift type structures work, how human beings tend to interact in these things, and that becomes a social and an anthropological questions, how society is mutualized, how does that mutualization get augmented, accelerated by the existence of that web. And I've seen some of the most amazing sharing economies come through as a result of the web. Flight car comes to mind, where people drive to an airport, park a car, take a flight, get to the other side, and then hire a car. Once you realize that people do it in both directions, the web provides an environment for people to be able to inventorize their cars, to make that inventory discoverable, and then to be able to trade it. Before you know it, people start sharing meals by saying, well, I'm cooking for 4, I can cook for 5. And I'll sell on that spare capacity. So, it's not just about commerce. I love the work that can be done in the not-for-profit sort of sectors, as when people sort of come together collectively to solve problems because of the web in ways that they could not have solved before. My favorite there is what happened at Fukushima and Tohoku during the earthquake and the tsunami, where while there was tragic loss of life, while there was a lot of damage to property, one of the things that was very, very hard to deal with was damage to the memories that had been retained by the inhabitants who'd been forced out of home and hearth. And these included things like water-damaged photographs. And then along came somebody with saying, I'm going to run something called Operation Tohoku Photo Rescue. And all that person did was scan photographs at the highest resolution they could there and make it available for the collective of humanity to bring in their photoshopping or photo improving skills, just for the pleasure, altruistically, of being able to help repair some of the damage to memories. Right? I see those sort of actions. So part of what the web represents is this ability for us to standardize our inventory, whether it's our ideas, whether it's our physical goods, whether it's our intellectual goods, to be able to form low-cost discovery routines for those ideas, to be able to pool and share and get a peer review of what it is we're actually learning there, to act as these human sensors and actuators for anything going from mobile phone signal maps to understanding of how viral movement takes place. And every one of these, whether it's in politics, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in education, we have an ability to study rather than go through this big N, little n political argument about, every single question, however minor. And that's holding up the majors, and I think we have that opportunity now.
Thank you. We're running out of time. We've got one more question. If you keep your questions short and a little short answer, JP, because there's coffee here. But
Okay.
This is the last question.
Hi, Thanasis. Quick question to the Oracle. I very much enjoyed your account of how the web evolved, and it's becoming a means of empowerment and sharing that can help people engage with data and with their lives in many different ways. So I was wondering, do you think there is a degree of inevitability to this kind of evolution, that sooner or later, given that the technology is there, government, society, such and such, things will develop that way? And regardless of whether, this evolution is inevitable or not, what do you think are the biggest threats that would slow it down or destroy it?
Okay. I'm less worried about the destroy, but I see damage from slow it down, so I think that's what we have to work against, because I've seen in many paradigm-shifting environments the ability of the incumbent to hold up reality for as long as possible for what may be short-term gain. I think the difference, the change is like what happened with SOPA and PIPA, like what happened with work done to do with intellectual property, even in Europe, which faced a similar vote, that this connected environment where the customer has power, the citizen has power, the patient has power, the individual has power, is leading to unexpected behaviors in terms of people whose culture comes from a hierarchical or command and control environment. The broadcast nature of control it's been a long time since it's gone, but it needed the empowerment of everybody being connected. You can look at this mainframe, mid-range, PC, laptop, sort of mobile, wearable type structure as saying every wave of computing has changed the coverage model of how many people have access, connectivity, to shareability, to feedback loops, to interactability. And as long as that continues, I am confident that we will be able to prevent the slowdowns because we have the amplification mechanisms in place. But actually, your question is itself a web science study question, because I've seen this parallel type of questions in a microcosm about the use of the web for, say, protest. Okay, and as we understand about the use of the web for protest, we may understand about the use of the web for whistleblowing. We may then understand about the use of the web for erroneous data correction. And then suddenly the sum of those parts create a whole where gaming the system is just less. But we have to study it rather than just believe it. You know, I have so much power to be a pinko lefty tree hugger. I'm utopian in nature, but it's nice to be able to back those things up with real hard evidence.
I think that's a perfect note to finish on, JP. I think we've heard, this conference has meant a lot, that the whole idea of what the purpose of web science is, that it is more than data science, it's more fundamental, and that we need, as Laura said in her keynote yesterday, we need empirical evidence, but we need people who can interpret that evidence in different contexts. And the major thing I got from your talk was, as also has resonated here, is that 70% of the world is still not on the internet. And actually that world may lead us very much into the next 25 years of the web, and that web science could be more profoundly important in that world than in the world that's had the internet for the last 20 years. So, JP, that was absolutely fantastic. I can't tell you what an amazing experience it's been in here to have you on this screen and us watching you and people coming up and asking questions.
I shudder to think.
No, it's fantastic. And you live up to both your reputation and to the image we have of you here perfectly. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank JP for a wonderful keynote?
Thank you very much. And with that, I shall sign off. Enjoy your coffee.
Thank you very much and get better soon. See you soon. Bye, JP.
Thank you.
Turn them off.